All right, welcome to Creekside Book by Book, and tonight we're going to look at 2 Kings chapter 4, starting in verse 1, and go through 6:23. So we're not going to go all the way through 6 because there's an odd story break in the chapter break there between 6 and 7, so I'd rather just add that on to next week so we have continuity. And keep in mind, verse numbers, chapter numbers, the writer of First Kings did not put those in there. And so there are times, even today, and towards the end of our text tonight, there's a passage that breaks on the paragraph, but the verse number is in the previous paragraph. And so, yeah, so that kind of stuff happens, which is annoying. And for some reason, that is not actually on my notes. Where'd it go? Oh, yeah, it is. Sorry, never mind. It's in chapter 5. So let's jump in. We're with the prophet Elisha, who is he has succeeded after Elijah. And there are prophecies that Elijah was responsible for that have still not all come about. So the house of Ahab is falling apart slowly. And Jehoram is king at the time and currently, and then Jezebel is still alive. And so next week we'll see her demise and the house of Ahab finally eliminated. But most of the stories that we're going to look at tonight are focused more on Elisha and his acts, and not so much with the king in Israel. And we really still have not had that much time with the southern kingdom really at all. Most of what we've been looking at has been in the northern kingdom. And so after Elisha, things start to go back and forth a little bit more. But this is an interesting series of events here because we have echoes from Elijah's ministry in what we're going to look at tonight. We have resurrection, we have the multiplication of oil, we have a water-based miracle. There's all kinds of things that show us that Elijah and Elisha are a continuing track of God's power in the life of the prophet. And so let's jump in. Chapter 4, verse 1. The wife of a man from the company of the prophets cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that he revered the Lord. But now his creditor is coming to take my 2 boys as his slaves." Elisha replied to her, "How can I help you? Tell me, what do you want? What do you have in your house?" "Your servant has nothing there at all," she said, "except a small jar of olive oil." Elisha said, "Go around and ask all your neighbors for empty jars. Don't ask for just a few. Then go inside and shut the door behind you and your sons. Pour oil into all the jars, and as each is filled, put it to one side." She left him and shut the door behind her and her sons. They brought the jars to her, and she kept pouring. When all the jars were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another one." But he replied, "There is not a jar left." Then the oil stopped flowing. She went and told the man of God, and he said, "Go and sell the oil and pay your debts. You and your sons can live on what is left." So here we have an indication of what's going on in this company of the prophets or school of the prophets, because these are not just people who are living like monks and or nuns, as separation from society. They have like normal lives, but they are also devoted to the Lord and wanting to serve Yahweh even in the midst of the corruption of the northern kingdom. And so this one man was married, had kids, had a farm, and he died. And what normally would happen in a situation like this is, well, maybe the sons then would take up the work of the farm and provide for the mother. And that's how the generations would continue on. But there is a famine happening at this time. And most of what we're going to read over the next several chapters is in that context of famine, where there's not enough water, there's not enough food in the region, which is part of the judgment of the Lord on the northern kingdom for their idolatrous ways. And so the man who died at some point probably leveraged his farm to another person who had more means, more wealth. So they were borrowing resources. And in the ancient world, this is the most common way that people would fall into slavery, is if they were not able to pay their debts, then they would become indentured servants, essentially, for 6 years, or until the year of Jubilee. And the goal was never to keep people in slavery forever in this system. It was to pay off a debt and then to send the person out debt-free, or even to send them with a blessing so that they can reestablish their lives after that year of those years of service, or the year of Jubilee, because that was when land was supposed to be reset to the original families. And so here, this woman, they're in debt, they can't pay, and so she's concerned that her boys will be slaves. And so Elisha is like, how can I help you? What do you have in your house? And Elisha is a person of influence, and we'll see the kind of influence that he has as we continue on. But he doesn't just have a spiritual influence; he also has influence with the government and the king and the court. And so people recognize his authority and his power, which is what gives him a significant amount of influence in the region. But she has nothing except a little bit of olive oil. And so Elisha, what's interesting here is that go and get all the extra jars in the community, and then go home, close the door, and just start pouring and filling the jars. And one of the things that people will read these stories about Elisha, and it looks like he is doing some kind of magic. And in the ancient world, they might even consider some of his miracles as a kind of magic that is not unlike what they would experience in other cultures. But here, Elisha is removing himself from the situation. Like, Elisha is not the one pouring the oil. Elisha is not even in the room. And so he's showing that, like, the power of God is working in this situation, and Elisha can do this from a distance. He doesn't have to manipulate anything. And the only limitation really in this story is how many jars can they get? And because they just keep pouring and pouring and pouring, and the jars keep getting filled up. And that's what they can then turn and sell to pay off their debts and survive in the coming years. And as soon as they run out of jars, the oil stops. And one of the things I've heard so many sermons on this passage, and a lot of times, people talk about, read these kinds of passages and say, this is what God wants to do for you. And we got to be careful. Can God provide these kinds of miracles? Absolutely. And I've seen God provide financially in my life. I heard a story today about God's miraculous provision for somebody who made their pledge for the Christmas missions offering, and they were planning on just taking that money from their savings account and like fulfilling their pledge. But the week after they made their pledge, somebody gave them a gift of like a check that was the exact amount of their Christmas missions offering pledge. And it was like, oh, wow, this is amazing. And then the next week, their shower like failed. And because they didn't have to take the money from savings, they were able to pay for the repair for the shower that they were going to go give to the CMO. So God provided miraculously for the CMO, but then also God showed his provision for their repair of their house. Like, these kinds of things happen more often than we think. But we shouldn't go around and like tell people, you just need more jars. Like, that should not be the moral of the story here, is get more jars. The moral is like, will you trust the Lord? Will you trust the Lord when it seems like all situations are dire? And so this woman got all the jars in the community and saw God continue to pour oil into these jars. So, yeah, it's a pretty interesting story. And as one of the things that I just love about it is the removal that Elisha has from the situation. He's not the one doing the work. And so like he's giving instruction, but it's God doing the work, which is a key piece of all of this. All right. So the next story picks up verse 8. One day, Elisha went to Shunem, and a well-to-do woman was there who urged him to stay for a meal. So whenever he came by, he stopped there to eat. She said to her husband, I know that this man who often comes our way is a holy man of God. Let's make a small room on the roof and put in it a bed and a table and a chair and a lamp for him. Then he can stay there whenever he comes to us. And so this is a tremendous act of generosity for somebody like Elisha, who is an itinerant teacher. He's traveling throughout the region, and having somebody like this who's able to like have the means to like, let's just build a room for him. That's his room. And so like, it's very generous to welcome somebody in like this. And this is something that, I've seen churches do. Like there's a church in Seattle that for years, Calvary Christian Assembly is what they're called. And they're a part of our fellowship, but they have in their building an upstairs with a tiny little apartment that you would never know is there unless somebody told you. But that apartment has been used for missionaries coming through, guest speakers. Like they built that on purpose to have a place that to welcome people who are traveling and providing for them. And so here this woman is doing that. And one day when Elisha came, he went up to his room and lay down there. And he said to the servant, his servant Gehazi, call the Shunammite. So he called her and she stood before him. Elisha said to him, tell her. So Elisha said to Gehazi, because she is standing in front of Gehazi outside of his room, right? So there's a little bit of a telephone game happening here. Tell her, you have gone to all this trouble for us. Now, what can be done for you? Can we speak on your behalf to the king or the commander of the army? So here we see Elisha's influence a little bit. Like you've been so generous. Can I share your generosity with those in charge? Maybe get a tax break or some relief from something. Something like that is kind of maybe what he's talking about. And she replied, I have a home among my own people. And so like, that's enough for her. Like she's cared for is what she's saying there. What can be done for her? Elisha asked. Gehazi said, she has no son and her husband is old. Then Elisha said, call her. So he called her and she stood in the doorway. About this time next year, Elisha said, you will hold a son in your arms. No, my lord, she objected. Please, man of God, don't mislead your servant. But the woman became pregnant. And the next year, about that time, she gave birth to a son, just as Elisha had told her. And so the story, it should remind us of Abraham and Sarah being unable to conceive. And the Lord's words to Sarah was, in about a year, you're going to be holding a baby and you're going to name him Isaac. And so here is a similar echo, like God's provision for a baby that seemed impossible. And so this is what happens. And so it all comes to pass. She's holding a baby. In verse 18, the child grew, and one day he went out to his father, who was with the reapers. He said to his father, my head, my head. His father told the servant, carry him to his mother. After the servant had lifted him up and carried him to his mother, the boy sat on her lap until noon, and then he died. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, then shut the door and went out. So what most people think is happening here with this boy, like it seems like he may have some kind of sunstroke. So he's got a headache and he's weak and tired. And so outside working with the reapers during harvest season, it's hot, it's sunny, maybe had some kind of heat stroke. So he passes away, and she lays him in the prophet's bed. Like that, not in her son's bed, but takes him up to the prophet's room, lays him in the prophet's bed. She called her husband and said, please send me one of the servants and a donkey so I can go to the man of God quickly and return. Why go to him today? He asked. It's not the new moon or the Sabbath. That's all right, she said. She saddled the donkey and said to her servant, lead on, don't slow down for me unless I tell you. So she set out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. And so her husband that doesn't know right now, like she hasn't said our son's dead, right? She's like, I just need to go. And so this is maybe like 12 miles of travel to get to Carmel. And her husband's like, it's not, why should you go today? It's not the new moon or the Sabbath. And there was probably some kind of tradition on a new moon festival, like this is a good opportunity to make a commitment to the Lord, make an oath, make sacrifices. You might expect to have an encounter with the prophet. He might be around and available on those kinds of days, or the Sabbath day, which is when people would rest, but also they would find ways to worship in their community. At this point, the synagogue system had not yet been established. And so that's something that happens later during the exile. They start building synagogues for gathering. And so it's one of those things where it's like, her husband's like, I don't understand why you're doing what you're doing, but okay. And so she goes. When the prophet, here in the next section, when the prophet saw her in the distance, the man of God said to his servant Gehazi, look, there's the Shunammite. Run to meet her and ask her, are you all right? Is your husband all right? Is your child all right? Everything is all right, she said, which, as the reader, is not true. We know this. Everything is not all right. But maybe she didn't want to tell Gehazi what was wrong. She wanted to go and see the prophet directly, because so far it's been so much of their communication has been mediated with Gehazi. So maybe she wanted to go directly to the prophet. And so when she reached the man of God at the mountain, she took hold of his feet. Gehazi came over to push her away, but the man of God said, leave her alone. She is in bitter distress, but the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me why. And so she comes and like bows down in front of him and holding his feet as a sign of like submission and recognizing like she is in need and is with somebody who has the power to help her. And Gehazi is like, stay away from my master, from my prophet. So this also, like, as we're reading this, there should be little like things that like kind of red flags, because later Jesus in his ministry, he is surrounded by people and little children are coming to him and the disciples are trying to push them away. And Jesus says, no, let the little children come. And, this part of the significance here is that children and women did not have the same status as men. And so, Gehazi might be trying to protect the prophet's honor and status, but Elisha is not as concerned with that. But then we also see she's in distress, but he doesn't know why. The Lord has hidden it from me. And so Elisha is not just he's not a fortune teller. He's not a soothsayer. He is as much a recipient of God's grace as anybody else. And he doesn't know everything. We're recognizing he has his own limitations in his ministry. The Lord doesn't tell him everything he needs to know. Later, we'll see the Lord tells him a lot of things, but not everything. And so she says, did I ask for a son, my Lord? She said, didn't I tell you, don't raise my hopes. Elisha said to Gehazi, tuck your cloak into your belt, take my staff in your hand and run. Don't greet anyone you meet. And if anyone greets you, do not answer. Lay my staff on the boy's face. But the child's mother said, as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you. So he got up and followed her. Gehazi went on ahead and laid the staff on the boy's face, but there was no sound or response. So Gehazi went back to meet Elisha and told him, the boy has not awakened. When Elisha reached the house, there was the boy lying dead on his couch. He went in, shut the door on the two of them, and prayed to the Lord. Then he got on the bed and lay on the boy, mouth to mouth, eyes to eyes, hand to hand, and he stretched himself out on him. The boy's body grew warm. Elisha turned away and walked back and forth in the room, and then got on the bed and stretched out on him once more. The boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. Elisha summoned Gehazi and said, call the Shunammite, and he did. When she came, he said, take your son. She came in, fell at his feet, and bowed to the ground. Then she took her son and went out. So this is so she tells him, like, did I ask for a son? The answer actually is no. She did not ask for a son. Elisha said, you will have a son. She didn't ask for the son, but now she's got the son. And it's like, this is just the blessing that she did not expect and now has lost. And so don't get my hopes up. Look at this pain that, like, she's hurting here. This is not what she expected. And then it's just the rug's pulled out from under her. And so Elisha is like, oh, we'll make it right. And so sends Gehazi ahead with the staff, thinking maybe there's some kind of authority Gehazi has. But Gehazi is not Elisha. And so his effort to come and like put his staff on the boy's head, like nothing happens. And I don't know if it's because Gehazi doesn't have the same kind of faith, doesn't have the same kind of authority. We don't know. It doesn't work. And so when Elisha gets there, this is another one of those things where people are like, this may be some kind of sympathetic magic as the culture like around them as he lays out on the kid, and like we don't know, but it sounds like a lot like CPR. It's kind of what it sounds like. And so he does this stretching out on the kid, and he warms up, and then he does this again, and then it says he sneezes 7 times. And the word for sneeze, as I was researching this, like this is one of those things that is a unclear word. We don't know for sure what he did 7 times. And so people have gone with sneeze, but it could also be moaned, it could also be convulsed. So there could be some kind of spiritual thing happening here as well. And this could be some kind of exorcism that is being performed in a spirit leaving the boy. We don't really know, but the boy was dead and he's alive again, which is not uncommon, not unlike Elijah in his ministry as well. And so we've seen Elijah perform miraculously for food. Now Elisha is performing miraculously in oil, and we'll see a food miracle later. And we've seen Elijah pray for somebody and they were resurrected. And here we have another example of Elisha praying for somebody and that person being resurrected as well. And so there are these consistent workings between the two prophets and their ministry. And so some people will look at texts like this and say, well, maybe they're just telling the same story twice. But there's enough variation in the details to say, no, this is a unique thing that Elisha is experiencing. It's not just somebody saying, yeah, Elijah did that, Elisha did it too. No, it's like, this is a different event. There's enough going on here. And so, yeah, so we're just being reminded in these stories, though, that Elijah, Elisha, men of God, walking in God's authority. God is doing amazing, wonderful things through their service. So verse 38, Elisha returned to Gilgal, and there was famine in that region. While the company of the prophets was meeting with him, he said to a servant, put on the large pot and cook some stew for the prophets. One of them went out to the fields to gather herbs and found a wild vine and picked as many of its gourds as his garment could hold. When he returned, he cut them up into the pot of stew, but no one knew what they were. The stew was poured out for the men, but as they began to eat it, they cried out, man of God, there is death in the pot, and they could not eat it. Elisha said, get some flour. And he put it into the pot and said, serve it to the people to eat. And there was nothing harmful in the pot. And so this is a purification miracle of sorts. And so if there's a famine, you're looking at everywhere for different food options, right? And so this guy finds this, what looks like, just like a yellow pumpkin, right? A yellow squash. And so it's these gourds, and he picks them all and he brings them back. He's like, I found this, everybody. And nobody stopped to say, we don't know what that is. Nope, just cut it up, throw it in the stew. Let's see what happens. It turns out it is poisonous. And there are different plants that people have said this could be that are native to the region. And so while we don't see anybody actually dying from the pot, from the food, it seems like they recognize, like, there's something wrong here. We can't eat this. So what Elisha does, though, is interesting, because here he just takes flour and puts it in, and it purifies the pot. And we don't really know why that works. And this is, again, like people have a lot of different scholars are trying to come at this and say like Elisha is like the counter magician from the courts of the pagan empires around them. And so like they're doing these things, and he's doing these things in a way that is saying like, this is where the real power is. So it's not magic, but the people would have recognized like, oh, the priests in Moab did that similar thing. And so what Elisha is doing is saying like, yeah, but this actually works. Like I'm actually doing this. And so over and over again, though, what Elisha's story is saying is he's not the one doing really anything. It's the Lord working through him. And so when he prays, it's God working. When he tells the people to pour the oil, it's God working. Even here, throwing flour in a pot probably shouldn't do anything. But here God is using this as a way to purify the food. And so that's something just to keep in mind. So as you're reading through these, we have all these stories happening over and over again, and there may be a counter narrative that he is trying to, or that the writer of Kings is providing to us to counter what the pagan priests and pagan prophet people might be trying to do as well at this time. So, verse 42, a man came from Baal Shalashah, bringing the man of God 20 loaves of barley bread baked from the first ripe grain, along with some heads of new grain. Give it to the people to eat, Elisha said. How can I set this before 100 men? His servant asked. But Elisha answered, give it to the people to eat, for this is what the Lord says. They will eat and have some left over. Then he set it before them, and they ate and had some left over, according to the word of the Lord. So this is a multiplication miracle as well. And it should, like, this is another flag here. Like, man, this sounds awfully familiar to the ministry of Jesus. And Jesus even says they'll have enough, and there was enough left over in the Gospels. But what's going on here is what it's so interesting is the man is bringing to Elisha his first fruit offering. And this is an offering in the law that is supposed to go to the priests. But Elisha is not a priest. But this in the northern kingdom, there are no good priests because they are all like complicit in the idolatry that Jeroboam set up between Dan and Bethel and the shrines there. And so Elisha is the only good representative of the Lord that this man knows. Like, I'll bring it to Elisha. He's a man of God. And so he's bringing the first fruit offering, and you know, it's a gift to Elisha, and Elisha then shares it with the people. But, you know, there's a famine, so it's not a lot. And so his Gehazi is like, I can't give this to all these people. There's not enough for them. And so again, he says, well, just start serving it to them. There'll be enough left over. And so 100 men are provided for. And so if this is the school of the prophets, this 100 men might also include their families. So there's a lot of folks. There's more than 100 men, most likely. Just as in the feeding of the 5,000, that's counting the 5,000 men that were there that Jesus provided for. But there were also women and children as well. And so, again, these are stories we read in the Old Testament. We see echoes from past things with what God had done so far. But then as we continue on, we see in the ministry of Jesus, these similar kinds of things echo forward from the story. And so we should just remember, like, God is consistent. Like God is not limited to a one-time situation. He desires to bless. He desires to provide. And, you know, we can read these stories and say, look what God can do. But we should never try to say, like, this is what God must do. And so we should be cautious and cautious and hopeful in how we approach these things, because, you know, God's in charge and we are not. So, all right, this chapter 5 is one long story. And I first really encountered this story when I was and really had a good time with it when I was in the band. We were playing for a church camp, and the lead pastor of the church, Ken Hutcherson, former Seahawk, he was the camp speaker for this junior high camp, which was just such a great experience all around. The camp was great. Kids are great. Ministry was cool. But he spent the whole weekend talking about this passage to junior hires. And so talking about leprosy and then military, all this different stuff. It was just so good. And so this is I just have a lot of really warm feelings and affection for this story because, it was just that weekend was just very life-changing for me. So verse 5:1. Now, Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. So that's Syria, what we would call Syria today. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. So the details here that should stand out to us, or I hope stand out to us, is here he is a military commander in enemy country, but the Lord, Yahweh, has given him victory on behalf of Aram. The Syrian people. Like, the Lord is not limited to our borders. Something to keep in mind. The Lord is not limited to to only be able to work through the people of Israel, and he can work through whoever he wants to work through. And even here, working through Naaman, he may have done work. He might have fought against the northern kingdoms, and the Lord was giving him, Naaman victory for Aram, even against Israel. Something to keep in mind. Now, bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." And leprosy is not like Hansen's disease. We should just make that note. Like, today, what we call leprosy is Hansen's disease. There's nerve endings that start failing. And that, that's why people may lose digits and feet and hand, like they just stop feeling parts of their body. That's what we call leprosy. This is more like scaly skin, psoriasis, and really bad. Is it psoriasis? Yeah, eczema, like those kinds of things that like really bad, really painful. And one of these kinds of illnesses made people unclean in all kinds of different cultures, not just in Israel. And so if you had leprosy, you were often treated as an outsider. And so Naaman, a man of valor and strength for his people, also has this illness that keeps him from being fully a part of society. And so the raiders from Aram went and took these slaves, and one of them is this Israelite girl who urges her mistress to go to say, like, you need to go see the prophet in Samaria. He can help Naaman. So Naaman went to his master, the king, and told him what the girl from Israel had said. "By all means go," the king of Aram replied. "I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So at this time, Israel and Aram will probably have some kind of treaty and peace that's worked out between them. And so I'll send a letter with you to go I'll send a letter to the king of Israel. So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. That amount of money could be like $1 billion today. Just FYI, that's a lot of wealth. And 10 sets of clothing. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, "With this letter, I am sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy." That's the letter that is being sent to the king, "so that you, king, may cure him of leprosy." As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, "Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me." So the king of Israel reads this letter as an overture to say, what kind of power and authority do you have? Can you cure my general? If not, now Jehoram here most likely is thinking, well, now I'm about to go to war with the Syrians because I know I can't do this, even with all this money and all. Like, his motivation is like he would want these things, but he knows he can't do it. When Elisha, the man of God, heard what the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him a message. So I don't know how Elisha heard what is the king of Israel is doing. I don't know if an angel told him. I don't know if somebody in the court in Samaria was like, "Oh man, Jehoram's freaking out right now." I don't know. But Elisha hears about it and is like, "Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, so Gehazi most likely, go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed. So it's basically, Elisha doesn't even see him. It just says, go wash in the Jordan, and you'll be cleansed. Naaman went away angry and said, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot, and cure me of any of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed? So he turned and went off in a rage. And so he's wanting the prophet to do a little jig, like essentially like, do something, prophet. And like, there's clean water where I'm from. I don't need to come here. Like, and so he leaves in a huff. Naaman's servant went to him and said, my father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, wash and be cleansed? So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, and the man of God had, as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant. The prophet answered, as surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing. And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. If you will not, said Naaman, please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. But may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master, the king, enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and he is leaning on my arm, and I have to bow there also. When I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this. Go in peace, Elisha said. So the man's cleansed, brand new, wants to pay Elisha for his services. But again, Elisha didn't do anything. He's not the one healing Naaman. He tells him how to be healed, but Naaman actually has to do the work of washing 7 times in the river, and that's the Lord doing all of that. And so that's why Elisha's like, I'm not going to take money from you because you don't make me rich. I don't want you to feel like I'm indebted to you in any way. No, it's the Lord doing this. So Naaman asks to be able to take dirt back. And the reason is because he wants to build an altar to the Lord in Syria, in Aram. So this is not the land of Israel, but he wants to take the land of Israel with him so that he can make an altar there on holy ground. Now, God's not limited to earth and dirt, but in Naaman's mind, this is how God's work. Remember last week they were going to war and they're like, well, the God of Israel is the God of the hills, so let's fight in the valleys. And so people were very geographically based in how they thought the gods worked. And I'm sure Elisha was like, you're going to just wear out some mules, but okay, go for it. But then there's this wonderful little thing here where he's like, look, I am going to devote my life to the Lord. I'm confessing that he is the only God, but I also have responsibilities in my job to the king. And so when he goes in and he needs me to help him bow down, that I have to bow with him, but I'm not bowing to Rimmon. I know that whatever's happening with Rimmon is nothing compared to Yahweh. And so Elisha tells him to go in peace. Like Elisha is recognizing the salvation work that's happening in Naaman's life here is more powerful than having to go into a building and help an old man kneel down. And so, yeah. So, I mean, this story is fascinating. And it doesn't work the way anybody would think it would work. Even now, when you talk about like miracle services, like people are like, you got to lay your hands on the person just right and all these different things. And there's people who try to work out formulas and try to say, this is how you pray for somebody to be healed. And Naaman's story is like, nah, just go rinse in the water. And the prophet doesn't do anything. And God can still heal. And so we one of our challenges is we want to see things happen. and see the work happen. And then we can know it's happening, right? And so like, I have a friend in high school who would not eat food if he did not see his mother prepare it. Like it's like that kind of confidence. And I mean, just thinking about it's like, Johnny, your mom's got to be exhausted. But like that kind of confidence in like, I've seen it, I can trust it. And this is one of those stories where it's like, I don't see God doing anything really. I don't see the prophet doing anything, but God is still working. And can we trust that? And so we have, and Elisha is just a man of honor, a man of the Lord. I'm not going to take any money. Doesn't work that way for everybody in this story. And we pick up in the next paragraph. After Naaman had traveled some distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elijah, the man of God, said to himself, my master was too easy on Naaman, this Aramean, by not accepting from him what he brought. As surely as the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him. So Gehazi hurried after Naaman. When Naaman saw him running toward him, he got down from the chariot to meet him. Is everything all right? He asked. Everything's all right, Gehazi said. My master sent me to say, 2 young men from the company of the prophets have just come to me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 sets of clothing. So not nearly all that Naaman brought, but it's a significant investment in the world of Gehazi. By all means, take 2 talents, said Naaman. He urged Gehazi to accept them and then tied up the 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 sets of clothing. He gave them to 2 of his servants, and they carried them ahead of Gehazi. When Gehazi came to the hill, he took the things from the servants and put them away in the house. He sent the men away, and they left. When he went in and stood before his master, Elijah asked him, where have you been, Gehazi? Your servant didn't go anywhere, Gehazi answered. Wow, lying to Elisha, not a good idea. But Elisha said to him, was not my spirit with you when the man got down from his chariot to meet you? Is this the time to take money or to accept clothes or olive groves and vineyards or flocks and herds or male and female slaves? Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and to your descendants forever. Then Gehazi went out from Elisha's presence, and his skin was leprous. It had become white as snow. So there is a transfer of leprosy from Naaman to Gehazi. Naaman learns God's saving power, and Gehazi sees the money and wants to chase after that. And so this story should also be a motivator, as we think about what God work entails. If it's just we need to get paid for these things, then that's going to lead to destruction. And usually it leads to destruction for the people who are like, no, I need this. I'm going to go make it happen. And it's not a critique to say that people who work for churches or whatever should not get paid. We see that it's spelled out throughout the scriptures, but here Gehazi is a man under Elisha's authority, and Elisha rejected the payment, but Gehazi then rejected Elisha's authority. And so he pursued after this for himself, and he lied about it. He said, my master sent me. There's 2 people who I'm going to give this to. And that none of that is true. And so he's taking advantage of a man who really had his life changed and wants to be appreciative. Naaman did nothing wrong here. But the prophet can see through all of that as he comes back. And yeah, it's just a fascinating, weird little story, addendum to the story here. We get the miracle, but then we also see, you know what? Even when God's doing amazing things, there's still dum-dums around who try to take advantage of people. And so we need to watch out for dum-dums. Chapter 6, the company of the prophet said to Elisha, look, the place where we meet with you is too small for us. Let us go to the Jordan, where each of us can get a pole, and let us build a place there for us to meet. And he said, go. Then one of them said, won't you please come with your servants? I will, Elisha replied, and he went with them. They went to the Jordan and began to cut down trees. As one of them was cutting down a tree, the iron axe head fell into the water. Oh no, my lord, he cried out. It was borrowed. I love that detail. I was borrowing that tool. The man of God asked, where did it fall? When he showed him that place, Elisha cut a stick and threw it in there and made the iron float. Lift it out, he said, and the man reached out his hand and took it. Now, this is a fun little story because like the company of the prophets is growing. And so like this church essentially is having just a revival situation, and there's more and more people coming, and families are having kids and all kinds of stuff. And so they're like, we can't all be here where we're currently at, so let's build a bigger building. And Elisha's like, yeah, this makes sense because we're all in this together, we're serving together, like having a community place is a good idea. So when they say let's each get a pole, it's like we'll each be responsible for a tree that we'll cut down and we'll bring over, and we'll start building our structure with those posts. And so they go, and Elisha's there, and this borrowed tool, like, oh, it's iron axe head. And iron at this time was becoming more prevalent, but it was still very, very expensive and very hard to make, to alloy and all that different stuff. I'm not a metallurgist, but I just know it was hard. And so like, that's the despair here, is like, it's a borrowed tool and I can't pay that back. And I don't know if anybody's ever borrowed a tool and broken it, but that is a moment of just like, oh, I can't with this. Like, yeah, I've been there. And so Elisha is just like, where does it fall? And he throws a stick in and the axe head floats. Why? Text doesn't tell us why. It just says, this is what happened. This is what happened. And in here, it's like, it's just another one of those miracles that shows like God's doing something here, and Elisha is doing very little. Like, it's over here. Let me throw this stick in. It shouldn't work. And that's why it's a miracle, because it shouldn't work. It shouldn't do anything. The stick should float and go down the river. But here there's it seems like the stick and the axe head switch their properties. And instead of the stick being the only thing that's floating, the axe head meets it somehow. As I was reading this and thinking about it today, I was reminded of that scene from Monty Python where they're trying to decipher like if the woman is a witch. And they're like, one of the things that the knight says is like, what floats? Like small rocks. It's like, no, wood. What else floats? Ducks. And so they weigh the, it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know how any of this works, but it seems works. And Arthur, in that scene, Arthur is amazed by the knight's wisdom. It's like, join my team. Anyway, that's what I thought about that most of the afternoon as I was, yeah, right, that's what happens. But that scene was just in my head all afternoon, because this is a bizarre story. All right, one more section here, and again, this is another one of those stories that's like, wow, how is this happening? Verse 8. Now the king of Aram was at war with Israel. So they were at peace, and now war has struck up again. After conferring with his officers, he said, I will set up my camp in such and such a place. The man of God sent word to the king of Israel, beware of passing that place because the Arameans are going down there. So the king of Israel checked on that place indicated by the man of God. Time and again, Elisha warned the king so that he was on his guard in such places. So somehow Elisha is getting like downloads of Aram's tactics and strategy. And he's passing that on to Jehoram. Even though Jehoram is a wicked king, Elisha still is like, hey, you've got people here I care about. I want to preserve life. And so he's warning the king where Aram's going to be. This enraged the king of Aram. He summoned his officers and demanded of them, tell me which of us is on the side of the king of Israel. Now, one of the things to note here, we just had a general from Aram come down and have his life radically changed by Elisha. And so maybe the king of Aram is looking at Naaman and saying, which one of us is telling him things? And, nobody is. None of us, my lord the king, said one of his officers. But Elisha the prophet, who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom. Go find out where he is, the king ordered, so I can send men and capture him. The report came back. He is in Dothan. Then he sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night and surrounded the city. When the servant of the man of God got up, and so this is a different person than Gehazi now, He's no longer a part of this. When the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. "Oh no, my lord, what shall we do?" the servant asked. "Don't be afraid," the prophet answered. "Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And Elisha prayed, "Open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see." Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. As the enemy came down toward him, Elisha prayed to the Lord, "Strike this army with blindness." So he struck them with blindness, as Elijah had asked. Elisha told him, "This is not the road, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will lead you to the man you are looking for." And he led them to Samaria, the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. After they had entered the city, Elisha said, "Lord, open the eyes of these men so they can see." Then the Lord opened their eyes, and they looked, and there they were, inside Samaria. When the king of Israel saw them, he asked Elisha, "Shall I kill them, my father? Shall I kill them?" "Do not kill them," he answered. "Would you kill those you have captured with your own sword or bow? Set food and water before them so they may eat and drink, and then go back to their master." So he prepared a great feast for them, and after they had finished eating and drinking, he sent them away, and they returned to their master. So the bands from Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory. So crazy. Just so weird, right? So that the king of Aram is trying to invade, and Elisha is giving warnings to where to avoid, and it's all working. So he goes to attack and surrounds Dothan, which is this small little city, surrounds it. And math-wise, Elisha has no hope. And that's what the servant is like. We're surrounded, we're toast. But Elisha just wakes up, he's like making his coffee, like, "I don't worry about it. We got this." And he asks to open his eyes. And he sees the fiery chariots and horses all around. And so that should be a little flag for us, right? Like, oh, wait. When Elijah was taken to heaven, he's, look, the army of the Lord, the army of Israel is coming. It was chariots of fire and horses. And so I don't know if Elisha just lived the rest of his life knowing that everywhere he went, he had this supernatural bodyguard. You know, when we talk about guardian angels, like, it should not just be like a dude in a white robe with really flowy hair. I mean, this is what a guardian angel should look like. Like, it is a fire that is protecting you and surrounding you. And this is what Elisha is recognizing. And so not everybody is ready to accept this supernatural reality, that there are spiritual forces and there are powers that are at work that we are not aware of. But Elisha is keenly aware. And he asks, and the servant sees this, and he trusts that God is up to something. And Elisha just says, like, blind these people. And he does. And then he's like, "Follow me." I love that. It's like, all right, you guys are in the wrong place. You got the wrong Dothan. I think you inverted the numbers on the address. I'll take you. And he walks them all the way to all these blind soldiers. He walks them all the way down to Samaria. They get into the city. And then he's like, okay, let them open their eyes. It's all like amazing. Like, this is clearly God doing something wonderful. And so the king is like, well, all right, they were trying to kill us. Should we kill them? But this is one of the beautiful things about the way God works. Like, no, I'm not, they didn't kill any of you. Like, if Jehoram had killed these men, Jehoram would have blood guilt. But God spared their lives. And he spared their lives first when he avoided the conflict at all these different outposts. God was sparing their lives by having them not go into conflict with the king of Israel, right? And so God, when we talk about like God valuing life, he values the life of enemies as well. Like, God does not want anyone to perish. But to see, like, here, it's like Jesus' ministry hasn't happened yet, but to see the power of God in the nation of Israel is one of the greatest testimonies that Israel has. And for the nations around to be able to see, like, look, we were a unit of 100 soldiers, who knows? and we were totally blind. We were in enemy territory, and we were led right into the capital of the city. We could have been executed, but instead of being executed, we had just the best dinner. And then we went home. That's God. That's the God of Israel, like doing that kind of work. And so when Jesus talks about in the Beatitudes, and we're going to get into the Beatitudes in just a couple of weeks on Sunday morning, but when Jesus talks about, you have heard it said, hate your enemies, but I say to you, love your enemies. This is what loving your enemies looks like. Like, that's like the kind of story where it's like, well, yeah, Elisha was special. He was different. But what Jesus is saying is like, no, like, this is what God wants us to do. This is what the Father calls us to do, is to be compassionate, to be gracious, to love our enemies, to not go out and trying to destroy people, but to look for ways to preserve life. Because as long as there is life, there is hope for the gospel to reach that person. So, yeah, Elisha is awesome. I mean, we'll have more of Elisha's story next week, but like what God is doing through Elisha is truly amazing. And it seems like it is more than what Elijah did. And so there's a expanding of power and influence. And where Elijah felt like he was alone, Elisha has a community, the school of the prophets that's working around him and with him. And are they perfect? No. Do they borrow tools and lose them in rivers? Sometimes. But God still provides. So so that's where we'll stop tonight. And then we'll come back in 6:24 next week. And we'll probably try to get through 10 next week. We will see. So at least 9. We'll see. We'll see. Any questions? Any questions from what we covered this evening? Kevin.
So do we know is it possible that Naaman could have been one of the people here that went to Dothan and
maybe? Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
He's worshiping God, and so maybe this is.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. We can't know for sure, right? Because they're not listed, so we can't just speculate. I would imagine that if Naaman was there, like they would say that, like Naaman or Naaman, because we just read about him. So unless, and chronology is not as important to the ancient writers as it is to us. So unless the stories are out of order, that could be a possibility as well. We don't know. We don't know. But it is still like whoever this general is, who's like, yeah, he just says whatever's in you're saying. Like, even if God was in your bedroom, like, and truth is, God is in his bedroom. Like, God is everywhere. And so it's not surprising to Elisha to have this kind of information. So yeah, any other thoughts, questions? Kevin, you got another one? All right.
Okay, the boy sneezing.
Yeah.
Do we know if that word is used anywhere else?
Let me see here. I did. I copied a note about it. Let me, if I can.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is
Thank
the word for sneezing. Is it used anywhere else? So let me scroll to where that note is.
Or 35.
Yes, thank you. The word translated sneezed occurs only here, and its meaning is uncertain. From the context, other possibilities would include convulsed or moaned. So yeah, and my footnote doesn't work in this app the way I want it to. So yeah, so it's a strange thing that happens. It happens 7 times. Like if you're looking at numerology, like you see the word 7, and the 7 in the scriptures is a number of completion. So following the pattern of creation, God created in 6 days and rested on the 7th. That's the week. And so it might be whatever he did, like if it was sneezed, moaned, convulsed, whatever it was enough to complete the work. Is one way you could look at it. So why he would sneeze, I don't know. Like and I don't know why. Like I'm not a Hebrew scholar. Hebrew is hard. It's very hard. And so I don't know why they translators choose to translate it as sneeze if it only occurs here. I don't know. Yeah, any other thoughts or questions? No? All right then, y'all. Yeah, we'll be back next week then, and we will jump in at 6:24. And so if you want to read ahead, I would encourage you to read through at least 9, and then maybe even 10. But yeah, we'll be back together next week. And yeah, have a good week, everyone.
Thank you.
God bless.
Thank you.